Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It had been nearly 10 years since I last saw Mr. Hollydopp. Back then, he was the kind of teacher people whispered about in the hallways, admired not just for his sharp suits and perfectly knotted ties, but for the way he had of making every student feel like they mattered. He didn't just teach literature, he breathed life into it. His classroom smelled faintly of coffee and old books, his voice warm and steady as he read from worn pages. I was 17 when I sat in the front row, scribbling notes I barely understood, half for the lesson and half for the excuse to watch the way he moved around the room. He was young for a teacher, 28 maybe, with eyes that seemed to see more than they should, but he was untouchable. He was Mr. Hawley. A decade later, I was no longer the shy girl who stayed after class pretending to have questions, just to hear him speak. I had my own job, my own apartment, my own quiet routines, and yet all it took was one moment to unravel that distance. It happened at my cousin's wedding. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers and champagne. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers and champagne. Murmur of conversation filling the church hall. I was chatting with distant relatives when I saw him. He hadn't changed much, maybe a few silver strands at his temples, but still carrying himself with that same calm confidence. He stood by the bar talking to the groom, and then he looked up and our eyes locked across the room. Emma. His voice was the same, warm and deliberate. I smiled, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nerves. Hi, Mr. Hawley. We spoke only briefly at the wedding, just enough for him to say, we should catch up before you leave town. His tone carried no obvious suggestion, but something in his eyes said more. The next day, we met at a cafe I'd loved as a teenager. The years melted away over coffee and shared laughter. Then, somewhere between reminiscing about school plays and old classmates, he said it. I still dream about you sometimes. The words hung in the air. I couldn't tell if he meant them innocently or not, but the way his gaze lingered made my pulse quicken. That night he messaged me. Then the next night, soon our conversations grew longer, more personal. He told me about his life, his career, his marriage. He didn't pretend his wife didn't exist. Instead, he painted a picture of a relationship dulled by years, a love that had shifted into something polite but passionless. I should have stopped then. But idea and single quotes teed up one evening, he suggested a walk along the river. The summer air was warm, the water reflecting the orange glow of the sunset. We talked about nothing and everything, books, travel, the way the town had changed. At one point, we stopped, and he looked at me as if weighing whether to say something. I shouldn't be here, he murmured. Then why are you? His answer was simple. Because when I'm near you, it feels like waking up after years of sleep. We didn't touch that night, but the air between us was thick with something unspoken. Over the next few weeks, we met again and again. In quiet corners of cafes, in the farthest aisle of the old library, in his car parked just far enough from the main road. Sometimes all we did was talk, but there was always that undercurrent. That shared knowledge of what we were holding back. The first time we crossed the line was in his classroom. School was out for the summer, the halls silent except for the hum of the old air conditioner. I had stopped by under the pretense of returning a book he'd lent me. He closed the door, and for a moment neither of us spoke. He stepped closer, slow, as though giving me time to stop him. I didn't. When his hand touched mine, it was almost tentative. But then, as if a dam had broken, all the restraint between us dissolved. We kissed deeply, desperately, and for those moments, nothing else existed. Afterward, we sat in the quiet, our foreheads resting together, breathing in sync. I don't know how to let you go again, he said softly. But the truth was, neither of us knew how to keep this going without consequences. The secrecy became heavier with time. Every glance at his phone made me wonder if it was his wife calling. Every time I left him, I wondered if it would be the last time Dot, and then one day it was. He didn't show up when we'd planned to meet. Hours later, a message came. Emma, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. I can't risk losing everything. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, and typed nothing in return. I deleted our messages, but the memories, the look in his eyes, the warmth of his hand stayed. Dot. It's been months now. I tell myself it's over, that it was just a brief return to a dangerous kind of magic. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I wonder if he still dreams about me, because I know I still dream about him. 3 years passed Dot by then. I had convinced myself I was over him. I moved to a new city, threw myself into work, and even let someone else into my life for a while. I kept telling myself what happened with Mr. Hale was just a reckless, intoxicating detour, something that didn't belong in the steady, sensible life I was trying to build. But forgetting isn't the same as letting go. Dot. It was a chilly October morning when I returned to my hometown for a weekend visit. My mother had been hinting that she missed me, and honestly, I missed the quiet streets and familiar smells of home. After lunch with her, I decided to stop by the bookstore near the old high school, the one with creaky wooden floors and a bell over the door that always rang a little too loudly. Dot. I pushed the door open, and there he was. Dot. Mr. Hale. He stood by the poetry section, flipping through a book, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. His hair was a little grayer now, his shoulders slightly more stooped, but when he looked up and saw me, the years collapsed in on themselves. Emma, my name left his lips like a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. For a moment, we just stood there, the smell of old paper wrapping around us. Then he smiled, small, careful. It's been a while. We made small talk at first. How have you been? What are you doing these days? Do you still write? I noticed he wasn't wearing a wedding ring. I didn't ask why. When I turned to leave, he said, Wait, would you have coffee with me? We walked to a cafe 2 blocks away. The place was quiet, the low hum of jazz filling the space between us. We talked for an hour, maybe more. I learned that his wife had left him a year ago. Different lives, different wants, he said simply, though the shadows in his eyes told me it had been more complicated than that. He asked about my life, my work, and listened the way he always had, fully, without distraction. Dot. At some point, the conversation slowed and silence took over. Not awkward, but heavy. He traced the rim of his coffee cup with his finger. I've thought about that summer more than I should have, he said quietly. There are things I regret in my life, Emma, but I never regretted you. The air between us tightened. My hands felt warm, my pulse quickened. After coffee, he walked me to my car. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to say goodbye. When we reached the parking lot, he hesitated, then said, I live just a few minutes from here. If you're not in a rush. It wasn't phrased as a question, but it was one. I should have said no. I should have remembered how it ended last time, how much it hurt. But instead I followed him. His apartment was small but warm, filled with books and faint traces of the same cologne I remembered from years ago. We stood in the doorway for a moment, the weight of unspoken history pressing down on us. Dot. And then he stepped closer. This time, there was no hesitation, no drawn-out restraint. His hands framed my face, his lips found mine, and I melted into him. The years between us fell away, replaced by something raw and familiar. We moved together like people who had been here before, who knew the shape of each other's hunger. But it wasn't just physical, it was a pull from deep inside, a reminder of something unfinished. Later, lying beside him, the world felt quiet. Outside, the wind rattled against the windows, but inside it was just the two of us. He brushed a strand of hair from my face and whispered, almost to himself, I never stopped dreaming about you. I didn't know what to say because I knew that, for all the years and distance, part of me had been dreaming about him too. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, soft and gold. I woke before him, my head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old books and of us. I should have left then. slipped quietly out before the moment could grow heavier, but my body didn't move. My heart didn't want. T.O. When he stirred awake, his arms instinctively tightened around me, like he feared I'd vanish if he let go. I thought it was a dream, he murmured. His voice was raspy, like gravel softened by rain. It's not, I said, my fingers tracing. Lazy circles over his shirt dot, we spent hours like that, not rushing, not talking about what this meant. It felt like being in a bubble, far away from the real world. He made me breakfast, the kind of simple, careful meal someone makes when they're trying to make the morning last. Eggs, toast, black coffee. We sat at a small kitchen table, sunlight. Catching in the steam between us dot when I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door and hesitated. I don't want this to be the last time, he said. It doesn't have to be, I replied. And a WASN single quotes T dot over the next few weeks, we found ways to see each other. Sometimes it was coffee in quiet corners of the city. Sometimes it was afternoons in his apartment where the hours slipped away unnoticed. I told myself we were both adults now, free to make our own choices. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That's simple, because every time we were together, the past hovered like a shadow in the corner of the room. One evening, rain pelted against the windows as we sat on his couch. He was reading aloud from a book of Pablo Neruda poems, his voice low and steady. I was curled beside him, my head resting against his shoulder. He stopped mid-sentence, closed the book, and looked at me. Do you ever think, he began slowly, that maybe we weren't ready for each other before? But we are now. The question lingered in the air between us. I don't know, I admitted. I just know I can't seem to stay away. He smiled faintly, but his eyes were searching mine, as if trying to read the truth I wasn't saying. We kissed then, slow at first, but it deepened quickly. The kind of kiss that carried the weight of years of wanting, of moments lost and found again. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer, as though he needed to erase the space between us entirely. That night, the connection felt different. Not reckless like before, but almost inevitable. Every touch carried the ache of time missed, and the thrill of time regained. Afterward, we lay tangled in the quiet, my fingers tracing patterns over his chest. I don't want to lose you again, he whispered. You won't, I promised, though even as I said it, I wondered if it was a promise I could keep, because the truth was, this time there was more to lose. We weren't the same people we were years ago. We had lived other lives, carried other scars, and now the pull between us wasn't just about desire. It was about something deeper, something that scared me more than I wanted to admit. The weeks stretched into months. Our lives began to intertwine in quiet ways, his sweater left draped over the chair in my apartment, my coffee mug sitting in his sink, texts that started with good morning and ended with can't wait to see you. But the closer we got, the more the outside world began to intrude. People in town started to notice. Old colleagues, former students. Whispers traveled fast in a small place, and I could feel the weight of their curiosity every time we walked into a cafe together. One evening, as we sat in his living room, the rain tapping softly against the glass, he turned to me and said, Emma, maybe we should leave this town. Start over somewhere no one knows us. My heart stuttered. The idea was tempting, a fresh start. Just the two of us. But it also terrified me. You're asking me to give up everything here, I said quietly. I'm asking you to choose us. He replied, his voice steady, but his eyes almost pleading. I didn't answer right away, because I knew that choosing him meant not just stepping into the unknown, but also closing a door on everything else. I didn't answer his question that night. Instead, I reached for him. Maybe it was my way of avoiding the truth, or maybe it was because I knew words could be twisted. But touch didn't lie. I pulled in close, my hands slipping into his hair, my mouth finding his with the urgency of someone who's already afraid of losing what she hadn't yet agreed to keep. The kiss deepened, slow at first, then quicker, hungrier, like both of us had been holding something back and could no longer pretend. He responded with that familiar intensity I remembered from all those stolen moments before, but now it was different. There was no rush to claim, only the certainty of knowing exactly how to make the other feel wanted. His hands slid over my back, steady and deliberate, memorizing me like he thought I might be gone tomorrow. We didn't speak for a long time. The room was filled with the sound of rain against the window, our breathing, and that quiet hum that happens when two people have found the exact rhythm of each other. After, we stayed tangled together, my cheek resting against his shoulder, his fingers drawing idle lines across my skin. "You always knew how to undo me," he murmured, almost. To himself, "You make it easy," I whispered back. We both laughed softly at that, but there was a heaviness behind it. We knew this wasn't just about physical need. This was about every look across a classroom years ago, every conversation that had lingered too long, every unspoken what if. And now, here we were, living in the answer to that question. The next weeks were like that, a series of moments strung together like pearls, evenings curled on his couch reading poetry aloud. Afternoons in my apartment where we cooked together, then left the dishes untouched for hours. Hurried kisses in my car before I drove away, hoping no one saw. But the passion wasn't just in the nights we spent together, it was in the smallest things. The way he'd rest his hand lightly on the small of my back when we crossed the street. The way his eyes lit up when I walked into a room. The way our conversations seemed to flow endlessly, each sentence sparking another. One night, he showed up at my door unexpectedly. No warning, no text. Just him standing there in the hall, hair damp from the drizzle outside, breathing like he'd run the whole way. "I couldn't stay away tonight," he said. "I needed to see you." I stepped aside without a word, and the second the door closed, his arms were around me, his mouth on mine like he'd been starving all day. We moved through the apartment without looking where we were going, bumping into furniture, laughing between kisses that turned sharper, more desperate it was. The kind of night where time didn't exist, where passion blurred into something softer and deeper, where we weren't just touching bodies but sinking into each other entirely. When morning came, he was still there, making coffee in my kitchen like he belonged, and maybe, in a way, he did. But I knew a choice was coming. He wasn't going to wait forever for me to say yes to his offer to leave together. And the truth was, every time he touched me, every time he looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered, I felt myself leaning closer to saying it. It was a Friday evening when he asked me again. Not casually this time, not over coffee or between kisses, but with that quiet, steady voice he used when he wanted me to really listen. "Come with me," he said. "Tonight. No more waiting." I stared at him, my mind a mess of reasons and excuses. The rain outside was pounding against the windows, a kind of drumbeat that made the air feel heavier. "I can't just walk out on everything," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "You already have," he replied softly. "Every time you're with me, you've left all that behind. You just keep going back because it's familiar." I hated that he was right. We spent that night together like we both knew it might be the last, not rushed, but deliberate. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word was weighted with meaning. He held me like a man memorizing the feel of someone before she's gone forever. In the early hours, I woke to find him watching me. His hand brushed my hair back. "I've loved you since you were 20, he said. "It took me all this time to say it, and I'm not going to pretend anymore." Something inside me cracked open at that. I almost said yes. Almost told him I'd walk out with him into the rain and never look back. But when morning came, he was gone. No note, no message. His clothes were missing from the chair, his cologne no longer lingering in the air. I thought maybe he had gone to get breakfast, but hours passed and there was nothing. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I found out his wife had called me. I froze when I saw her name flash on my phone, debating whether to answer, but curiosity and dread made me. Swipe the screen. Her voice was calm, too calm. "I think it's time you knew," she said. "He's gone. He left this morning, but not for you." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "He's gone to another woman," she continued, and her tone was almost pitying. "You weren't the only one, you were just the one who thought you were." The words hit like ice water. Every late-night confession, every passionate kiss, every promise, suddenly, it all tilted sideways. When I hung up, I sat in my apartment for what felt like hours, trying to reconcile the man I knew with the man she had just described. Was he lying when he said he loved me? Or was he simply the kind of man who loved too many people at once? The truth was, I would never know. But in the weeks that followed, I realized something unsettling. I didn't just miss him. I missed the version of myself I was when I was with him. And maybe that's why it hurts so much, Dot, because in the end, the real loss wasn't him walking away. It was me having to face that the passion we shared wasn't enough to keep him, and that it might not have been enough to keep me. Either